Welcome to Culture Crush with me, your host, Dan Dowman, where we get to meet some of the world's leading culture shapers, future makers, and power shakers. Today's episode is brought to you by Anthem, and as always, we'll be talking groundbreaking cultures, leadership challenges, and what you can do about them. Today on the show, I'm joined by power shaker Steve Chalke. Steve, my old friend, it's great to have you on the show.
It's great to be here. I'm certainly old. That's right. I don't know if I'm a power shaker or not, but I'm pleased to be here, and it's great to see you, Dan.
Now, some people who are watching this episode will know that you and I know each other. We've got a bit of a history, way back in our shared London days. But I was just trying to think through how long I've known you. I mean, it's got to be 12 or 13 years at this point. And I remember when you offered me a job once, I was in my local village pub, and I'd been to London, and I'd done this interview for this youth work position, and I really, really wanted the job. And it's such a proud and happy memory, because I stepped out of the pub and you were on the phone, and I thought, Steve Chalke's phoning me. This must be good news. I guess I got the job. So I just wanted to share that. Yeah, 12 or 13 years ago. What a joyful moment that was for me.
And for me too. Yeah.
I'm going to say some grandiose things, right? And kind of ask you some interesting questions, because for anyone who's not familiar with Steve Chalke, you've been really hugely influential on the social justice agenda here in the UK. Oasis runs over 50 schools across the country at this point. That's thousands of staff members, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of students. And you're building these community hubs across the UK. And there are really two parts to this question. One is I know a bit of the story, but I'm curious to hear where the Oasis story started. I know that our listeners and viewers will be interested. Where did the Oasis story start? And why did you make the decision as an organization to kind of co-opt education as a tool for community transformation and inclusion?
Well, the answer to the question, where did Oasis start, is it started in my head when I was 14. It started twice, actually, when I was 14 in my head, and when I was in my late 20s, 29, I think, in reality, actually getting round to doing something about it. But that probably doesn't do it justice. It started when I was 14 because I went to a youth club in a church in South London, in South Norwood, at the end of the Palace football ground, the Holmesdale Road end of the football ground. And I went to a dump of a secondary school. It really wasn't a good one. And so I started going along to this Friday night youth club at the church because there was a girl there called Mary that I really fancied, but she went to the posh school for kids that passed the 11 plus, whereas I went to the dump school for those who hadn't. And I went along every Friday night with my friend, it's called Kip, and some others. And then on one Friday night, Mary Hooper, that's her name, told me that if I was the last boy on planet Earth, she would never go out with me because I was ugly. And I don't blame her, really, because I think I had spent the last 6 months of Friday nights ogling at her from the other side of the hall, which must have put her off quite a lot. And so I walked home that night crestfallen, and I thought, I'm never going back to that youth club ever because it's so embarrassing. And then on the way home, up the side of the Palace football ground, actually, because it was at one end and I lived on the road on the other end. So it was a very short walk. I decided this. I thought suddenly dawned on me that even if Mary didn't fancy me, the story they told me at the youth club was a lot better than the one at the school, because the one at the school said, you'll never amount to much. I mean, it wasn't personal. They said it to us all. You'll work in factories all your lives. And whereas at the youth club, they said, your life's spectacular. You're made by God. You've got potential. You could do anything you like, and you ought to invest your life. And it suddenly struck me that was a much better story. So I was going to keep going to the youth group, even if Mary Hooper never spoke to me again. And so I did. And I also decided on the way home, and this is only a tiny little walk, that well, if I was going to go to this church youth group, I better be a Christian. And if I was going to be a Christian, I probably ought to become a church leader one day. And on top of that, when I did grow up, I was going to set up a school that was worth going to, and a house for kids to live in who no one cared about. I knew loads of kids like that. I was cared for by my mum and dad who were poor, but I had friends who really weren't cared for. And I was going to set up a hospital. I don't quite really know why I got that idea. So I got in and told my mum all this, except for the Mary Hooper bit, which was embarrassing. And she left school at a young age and hadn't had the benefit of her education. She just smiled at what I said and said, "Oh, very nice." And because of the kind of school I went to, it was the only piece of careers advice I ever got. And so that's when the idea of Oasis was born. And then from that day on, it was a wonderful gift, I think, to Mark Twain famously said, there are only two important days in your life: the day you're born and the day you find out why. And I feel that this was the day that I had the gift, the privilege of finding out why. And I realized that some people struggle for a raison d'etre. They never given that gift, but I was given that gift. And so every day of my life since then has been working on the scheme, if you see what I mean. So when I left school, I set up a youth group, I set up a theatre company, I worked with young people, I got a job in a church earning absolutely no money, but gave me the chance to do this stuff. I told the guys down at the youth club that ran this youth club, this is what I wanted to do with my life. They helped me, they gave me opportunities to kind of work with young people. Became a leader on a summer holiday club every year, all that kind of stuff. And then I went and did theology, emerged from it, worked for a church for 4 years as a youth worker, and then said to the church, I've got to leave because I've got to set up a school and a house and a hospital. And they allowed me to do that and let me live in a house where I lived. I was married by then. My wife's name's Cornelia. And the two of us lived in this house for a year, free. They didn't pay me anymore. And they said, you got a year to try to make this work. And then you got to move somewhere else because we can only give you this free for a year. So they gave me 12 months, no salary, no money, but a chance to just make things take off. And that's where Oasis came from.
So I'm going to ask you about the school, the house, and the hospital in a moment, but I know that the burning question in the mind of every listener right now is what happened to Mary? Do you know where she is today?
Yeah, I do. She's in Canada. I still know her. I know her sister. I keep in touch with her, not very well in touch with her. She got married. Her husband's name is Paul. She's got 5 kids. She's wonderful. She always says to me that I made her famous by telling this story because it is the story of Oasis. So I always say, Mary, I can't change it. I can't even change your name because that'd be fibbing. And but the funny thing is, I say to her, I owe her everything. Because just imagine if she'd have said to me, "Oh, I want to go out with you," like none of that. I wouldn't have been on that journey. So I think there's a great lesson for me and Everest. Even those moments, I know it sounds silly now, but at the age of 14 to be rejected by this, I thought my life was over. I really did. But even those, it's through those that was a little hardship really, and I'm not trying to compare it with any colossal hardship that people endure, but I've learned most through my errors, through my mistakes, through my tough times, through my down times. It seems that it's all the muddles and struggles and errors of life that really give us the fuel that we need for the future.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you said it very eloquently, actually, Steve, and it sort of became this profound point. But I was going to say that anybody who's going through a little bit of heartbreak out there right now, just think of Steve and his heartbreak with Mary when he was 14, because you never know what incredible fruits might emerge from that moment. But you make a very, very good point about through the hardship comes good things.
And the heartbreaks go on, don't they? The sadnesses continue. The setbacks always continue. Life is that extraordinary mix of hard things and good things. Actually, today, I tell you, earlier today, with a little team, we've just set up a new project within Oasis. And we stopped and we had a glass of champagne. Well, half a glass of champagne each, because that was as much as there was to go around. And I said to them all, we're stopping now because you've achieved so much. It's just what a remarkable day we've landed on. But if we wait till tomorrow morning, the next issue would have arisen. So grasp the moment, celebrate now, because the moment will pass. Life is that mix, isn't it?
Well, that's it. That's it. Now, the school, the house, and the hospital, you had this kind of shopping list of visionary things you wanted to do. Now, again, I know some of the story here, but tell me about those 3 items on that visionary wish list. Which ones actually happened?
Well, all of them have come about. So as you say, currently, I think we run 54 schools, but then we run other things that are almost like schools. So I don't even quite know how many schools we run anymore, because I don't know quite what qualifies as a school and what doesn't. And we run lots and lots of supported housing for young people. The only actual hospital we've ever built, we built in India and functions in India. I'm half Indian. My dad was Indian, and Oasis works in India. But we run endless amounts of healthcare here. We work in hospitals, in emergency units, and various other things. Some of those perhaps I'll talk about a bit later on. So all of that's happened. Some of it's happened in ways I'd imagined, and some of it, well, I would never imagine the scale. I said, house, school, kind of like. So all of this has taken off. But what I would say about it is this. I used to live on what's called Whitehorse Lane at the other end of the Palace Ground, as I've just said. And I spent so much of my life waiting for 68 buses. The 68 bus comes down Whitehorse Lane and goes to Croydon, where I used to go with my mates. It seemed like I was forever waiting at that bus stop for a bus to arrive. But I was waiting, longing for the bus to arrive. So when I saw it coming down the hill, because Whitehorse Lane is a hill, I was always ready. My eyes were fixed on the corner at the top of the hill. I could see the bus coming round the corner. I thought, yeah, the bus is coming. And I'd leap onto it. It was a request stop. So you had to put out your hand and you had to get onto it. If I wasn't waiting for the bus and longing for the bus, I'd probably miss the bus. I wouldn't be looking out for it. It's only people that are waiting and hoping for the bus to come that even notice half the time that it's gone past. And buses go past people who aren't waiting for them. So I'd simply say this: it's the vision, it's that gift, as I have explained it, that came from outside of me about what to do with my life. Therefore, because I know that, I'm always waiting for the bus. I'm always waiting for the opportunity, in other words, and I try not to miss them when they drive past me. I'm sure I miss them some of the time, but I'm looking for them. I'm constantly looking for them. And I sometimes see an opportunity to come to someone else and I think, jump on it, get it. But of course they don't see it because they're not looking for it. So it's that wonderful gift that I have had that has nothing to do with me, of knowing what my life should be about. I'm not even saying that I do a good job of spotting every bus that comes past. I'm not saying that I don't, to change the metaphor, wander off the path. But I know where I should be standing, and I know what I should be waiting for. And when anything looking like it comes along, I can go, instantly, that fits or that doesn't. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. And it kind of harmonizes with something I often think about, is the power of showing up and sort of creating opportunities in which you can be lucky, or you might see that bus coming, or you put opportunity within proximity of yourself, like be that in relationships or applying for jobs or doing some networking. Make sure you're a person who shows up, because if you've got a sense of vision and you have a sense of vocation in your life, put yourself in conversations where you might see that bus. Expose yourself to those relationships, those meetings, those opportunities. Because when you do that, you're increasing the chances that you're going to see that thing coming that you've been longing for and looking for.
Yeah. It's like the old story, isn't it? That's told. I've heard it told about Jack Nicklaus, who used to be a world famous golfer. But I've heard it told about so many people, and in the version of the story I heard years ago, someone said to him, "Jack, you're just so lucky, aren't you? You're just so lucky. You kind of you because he kept winning, these opens and all the rest of it." And he said, "Well, I find the more I practice, the luckier I get," and
Mm.
everybody knows a story like that. But genuinely, it's to your point, Dan. It's to, the number of meetings I go to where I think, I'd like to go home, I'm tired, but I just go, I'll just show up. And the number of rooms I'm in where I'm thinking, "Oh, I give up. No, I'll just cross the floor. I'll just open up a conversation." So I think the art of being in the right place at the right time is by being in a lot more places a lot more of the time. And occasionally something turns out to be an opportunity, but most of the time it's just a lovely conversation or meeting and off you go.
Now, I imagine that the opportunity to run academies across the country and to work with, like I said, thousands of staff members, thousands of families, hundreds of thousands of students. I'm curious to know, is there an approximate figure that you could pluck out about how many young people you're actually working with in the UK at the moment? But I imagine the opportunity to run schools actually sort of forms part of that hypothesis that you've got to be in the room, put yourself in that opportunity target area, have the conversations. Because at some point, somebody said to you, because you were in the room, you were in the right room at the right time, because you're in lots of rooms a lot of the time, somebody said to you, Steve, how about we look at opening a school? Like, how did that first opportunity come about?
Well, the first schools we opened weren't in this country. They were in India, in slum communities. Because I'm half Indian, as I said, I was given the opportunity of going to India to speak about youth work to the YMCA in Delhi, and then in what's called Mumbai now, Bombay. And so I went off and did this thing, and then I saw this incredible squalor and people living without anything in the slums as painted in that famous film Slumdog Millionaire, and 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 I just couldn't bear it. And I got on the plane to come home, and I was thinking, what am I going to do about it? And and I had this idea. It's an idea of working with youth groups to set up restaurants in empty shops to serve meals that you might get in some of these poorer communities, but charge people as much as they wanted to pay for them, you know, and pay what you like, pay as much as you can. And so I set that project up, and it really took off. Um, and it became one of the first, we called it Christmas Cracker. It was one of the first things that Oasis ever did, and raised lots of money. But that led on to, so setting up a school in a slum community is quite easy. You just hire a shack, put up a sign saying, "School opens next Monday, free." And, it works. Opening a school in England is a slightly more difficult process, as you can imagine. Here's the funny thing. So we'd set up these schools. In fact, we work in Dharavi, which is the slum that's in Slumdog Millionaire, besides anywhere else in India. And then in this country, randomly, somebody died, and the vicar that should have taken his funeral, this guy, didn't want to, refused to do it because he didn't like this man. And so the friends of this man asked me if I would not take the funeral, but do a celebration of his life. And nobody wanted to do that. This church didn't want to do the funeral, and then they didn't want to do the celebration of his life. So as a substitute, I was asked, because nobody else would do it. And I did do it. And a strange thing happened, because a guy called Tony, who I'd never met, he was an MP, actually, I found out, came to this funeral. And I got chatting to him, and he brought his wife with him, and her name was Cherie. And so I got chatting to them and swapped phone numbers and stayed in touch and told them about schools in India because, it just naturally came up. But it's about, I took this funeral, and it was tricky to take because so many people are opposed to this guy who died. Anyway, it just turned out that this guy, Tony, was an MP, and by a string of coincidences, well, the leader of the Labour Party at the time died, and his name happened to be Tony Blair, and he became the Prime Minister. And then he knew that we ran schools in India, and I thought, I've got to ask Tony if we can run a school here, because he was setting up the academies. And so I went to see him because I just knew him as a friend. That's all it was. But before I could get it out, hey, Tony, now you're the Prime Minister, can we run a school for you? He said, do you know, Steve, I just love you to bring what you brought to these slum communities, that same level of leadership and care, and we got a chance to launch a school. So that's how that happened. But it's all that back to that thing. It's like invest, even when Tony was at that funeral, I honestly didn't know who he was. I had to, there's a guy dead there. Go talk to him. So that's how that happened. Everything's a lot more hard work, and it's a lot more mundane than it seems to everybody. It's just the way life is, isn't it?
Well, it's such a remarkable story, and it really does. It goes back so clearly to that idea of put yourself in the conversation, do the thing that other people don't want to do. Play that I guess that servant-hearted role and volunteer yourself. Give yourself those opportunities. Show up to the meeting. Go the extra mile. Because every so often you're going to meet a Tony.
Yeah, it's about investing in everyone, isn't it? It's not, when you go to a gathering or a party and there's those guys that have a conversation with you, but they're always looking at, they're looking over your shoulder and they're looking at everyone else and all that kind of stuff. I always think, focus on the person that you're with, give them your attention. So it's whoever that person is. And so it's not because it's just, in that story, Tony was Tony. That was it. He's the bloke who was stood in front of me, so invest in whoever. Yeah.
We're going to come back and talk about the academies in a moment, because one of the things that we love to talk about on this show is culture, organizational culture, leadership challenges, and what people can do about them. And having grown so quickly and seeing the growth of Oasis academies over the last decade or so, you lot know a thing or two about how to organize cultures and how to build complex systems. But I wanted just to touch back on the healthcare thing, because you mentioned before about the development of different healthcare projects, and that got me thinking about a project that you launched in South London, it's St Thomas's Hospital, the Knife Crime Intervention Unit, because you mentioned before that we've only developed one hospital in India, but we've done these other healthcare projects. And that healthcare project at St Thomas's Hospital was really about youth violence and providing the right kind of care to young people who are victims of knife crime at that point of need. And I see how that vision has grown recently, and it's found new avenues to express itself, because you're also now launching, again in the youth justice space, this huge new project in South London. I think it's called St Martin's. So tell us a little bit more about that initial kind of youth violence project around knife crime and healthcare in London, and perhaps draw a line between that story and that project that you launched and what you're doing now, because it's grown hugely in recent years, and this new project is massive. So tell us about that.
Yeah, well, I mean, going back all those years, that's about 15 years ago, I suppose, that we began working in St Thomas's Hospital. It was the hospital up the road from the church that I was leading that you came to work with as a youth worker. So because it was just around the corner, I can't remember now, Dan, how it happened, but we got in touch with the, you just met people that worked at the hospital, and they started talking about the kids that turned up in A&E, as it was called then, and with stab wounds, etc., or children that were young people that were drugged or drunk, or had tried to take their own lives, whatever it might be. And out of that came a very long discussion, which ended. It was a long time. Ended with us being given some funding for 3 years to work in that A&E to see whether we could make any difference. But we put some money into research so we could empirically prove that there was a difference being made. There were outcomes. Middlesex University did it, actually. And that worked well. And here we are 15 years later, and we're still working in the hospital and still finding funding to do that. But of course, by doing that, you gain a great deal of insight into the lives of the young people that you're working with. And aside from that, we began eventually to work in other hospitals. So we work in another big London hospital, and we work in the 4 main trauma units in hospitals in Manchester, for instance, and various other things. So you're constantly learning about young people. Then what happened was in 2010, I bumped into a guy again, because I'd asked. I had a friend who knew David Cameron, and David Cameron became the Prime Minister, and he talked about this thing called the Big Society. Do you remember that? And so I asked my friend if David Cameron might want to come and do a speech about the Big Society at the church in Waterloo, which you worked at. And to my surprise, he agreed. So along he came to talk at this thing, and he brought with him various other people. And one of the people I got talking to, I didn't talk to David Cameron at all when he came. I didn't even say hello to him, but I didn't get a chance to say hello to him. But I got talking to this guy who I asked what he did, and he said, he worked in the government. And I said, what do you do? And he said, well, I'm responsible for justice. And then I said, we work with a lot of young people who don't get much justice. And I told him about the hospital, St. Thomas's, just up the road. And he said, well, have you got thoughts about this? I said, yeah, I've got lots of thoughts about the kind of young people who get into trouble and what we should be doing to care for them and prevent them ever getting groomed or into gangs or whatever it might be. So he said, you can write a paper about it, could you? And send it to me. So I did. Now, I cannot tell you how many papers I've written for government ministers or, whatever. And you never hear it. You slog at it and you never hear another word. And that's a continuing theme of my life. But anyway, I sent this one off, and he invited me and somebody else in Oasis in for a conversation. And so we went and had a conversation. And then they invited us for another conversation and another conversation. And to cut a very long story short, because it took all the time from 2010 to 2024, eventually we opened what we now call Oasis Restore, which is a complete revolution in the youth justice system, because it's an alternative to Feltham, or a young youth offending institution, a YOI as they get called. It's not a youth prison. What it is young people who are sentenced by a court can come to us, kids who are the highest risk, who've been involved in violent crime of one sort or the other, and then we work with them therapeutically, caringly. I would say you can't harm someone to heal them. You can't hurt them hoping to heal them. You can't punish them into a better life. Actually, you've got to understand the trauma that's going on in their life, the stuff that's broken down in their life, the lack of love, the lack of being seen, the anger that bubbles up inside, the fear that bubbles up inside. We know, don't we, that all behavior is communication. And if someone lashes out at you, verbally or whatever, They might be laying into you, but it's a lack of acceptance of themselves that's really speaking. And so we work with young people in that way. It took a long time. It cost a fortune. We had to have the law of the country changed to allow us to do it. But Oasis Restore is, as some people in the justice systems will say to me, the biggest step change in justice since the abolition of hanging, because it's not punitive. It's not about punishment. It's about restoration, which is why we call it Oasis Restore. I should say, and then leave it to you, Dan, to talk. When we took on the first school, I remember one of our trustees, two of them actually, saying to me, "What do we know about education?" And well, the truth is, if we leave the world to people who know about stuff, we're not going to get very far. We've all got to learn about stuff. Those people who know about stuff, they're all going to die. Then who's going to know about stuff? Invest, learn, and you learn along the way. And the more you learn, the more the opportunity comes to you. So now this thing in St. Martin's, as we call it, in Brixton, there was an empty school actually a secondary school that closed down. And it was owned by a charity rather than government. And the people that had owned it, they began it in 1699. That's a long time ago. This foundation had run this site since 1699. And they rang me up and they said, "Hey, Steve, we've heard about all the other stuff you're doing. What would you do with a site like this?" And so we've now opened it as Oasis St. Martin's Village. And it's about working with kids who have fallen out of education, but haven't been in a court, haven't been sentenced, and working with them in the same way as we work with children in Oasis Restore. It's not about restoration. It's about preventing young people ever falling into that criminal activity in the first place.
I'm so excited for Oasis Restore because I remember, this probably was about 8 years ago, sitting in Costa Coffee across the road from the Oasis Centre with Dave Parr, who we both know very, very well. And in our minds, we had this kind of like early idea for what changes to the youth justice system could look like. And so I'm so thrilled to see Oasis Restore. And I love how you put it. You can't harm your way to healing. And I would put it perhaps like this: you can't punish your way to restoration.
No, which is why we have the worst reoffending rate in Europe. It's why we spend so money but don't get anywhere. Well, as we record this, make this podcast, last week the government were just setting prisoners free early because our jails are full as a short-term measure to create spaces for the new people that they want to put in them. And then they're talking about building more prisons. Well, it's clearly, those are the things that people feel need to happen. And some of these are short-term measures, but they're not the answer. They can't be the answer because it hasn't worked, has it? The answer has to be somewhere else, because when someone reoffends, the amount of money we spend as a nation on that, £20 billion last year it was, and then we're going to build more prisons and we're going to lock more people up, and that costs a fortune to do, just that offending, let alone the reoffending, but it doesn't work. So we're not making our streets safer and we're killing our economy. So whichever way up you look at it, if you want safer streets and communities, don't do this because it doesn't work. If you want a stronger economy with a better workforce, and if you want to spend less money on the justice system, don't do this because none of it's working. Let's do something else. That's that's where it comes from.
We're talking really about restoration, but it's about holistic support and actually really getting alongside people. And I know that's something that really sits at the heart of all the schools that Oasis is leading. Now, I want to make sure that we acknowledge that normally on this show, Culture Crush, we like to spend a bit of time talking about the culture crush, and it could be a person or an organization. I think we're probably both agreed that Oasis is probably a good suitor for the title of Culture Crush for this episode. And we always like to talk about leadership challenges and what people can do about them. Now, again, I'm going to slightly lead the conversation a bit differently today, given the quality of the conversation we've had so far. and your expertise as a culture shaper. We've talked a lot about the thousands of students that are in Oasis academies, and we talked about thousands of families and thousands of teachers. Oasis is a huge operation around the world, but particularly huge here in the UK. And I know, talking to other people who work in other academy chains, how difficult it can be when a school joins that system, because you're bringing a lot of baggage with you. You're bringing a lot of their traditions, be them good traditions or sort of dysfunctional traditions, maybe. You're bringing the expectations of a whole community with you. And I think that's where I want to focus as the leadership challenge. As somebody who is the leader of such an enormous organization, how have you managed, and I'm sure there are challenges here as well, I'm sure it's not always easy, but how have you managed to take those communities on the journey with you when they join Oasis? How do you combat that sense of, but this is our patch, this is our community, you're taking us over? Like, how do you navigate the human complexities when a new school joins Oasis and it's maybe got 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 people involved? How do you actually take them on the journey with you and stop it from feeling like a takeover? Because I'm sure some people bring that energy with them, right?
So, I mean, the best is a simple thing, really, and it's a very hard thing. So it's a complicated thing as well. Is to understand that trust takes time to build. You can't instantly have it, but that people will judge you when you walk through the door within 30 seconds. And it will take a long time to undo that first impression, whatever it is. So you have to embody the vision, not just talk about the vision. You've got to be authentically you, and people, they can tell who's trying to climb the greasy pole, who's looking, to benefit themselves. Everyone see it a mile off, can't they? So it's about who you genuinely are, your inner life, what you believe in, because it comes out. Now you can say you believe in all sorts of things, but then believe in pushing yourself forward, or you can serve others, and that comes to the surface. It bubbles out. In this new project that I was just talking about, St. Martin's, which is a huge project, this giant school that's doing this extraordinary new work now. That most of the teachers, in fact, all the teachers left because we're doing something different. We're doing youth work and wrap around education that's supplementary, and we got educational specialists, psychologists, etc. But a few of the original staff have stayed. The ground staff, the maintenance staff, the receptionist, and one or two other office staff, and one of the joy to me in it all. I was talking to somebody who works for St. Martin's and has worked there for 23 years, I think. I was just chatting to her the other day. I was chatting to her today, actually. Been with her today, but I was chatting to her the other day, and I said, do you know, it matters to me that you feel valued in all this, because it's such a hard thing, Dan, as you say. You've been part of one institution for 23 years, and then all these new people walk in the door to do something different in a different way. And she said to me, which means more to me than anything else that's going on. I could tell you things that you might think are important, but she said to me, I've never felt that I belong as much as I do now. And today, she said to me, can we go watch Palace together? I said, I'm a Palace supporter, by the way, as you know. And I said, yeah, let's go. Let's go watch Palace together one Saturday. That, it means a lot to me, because it says to me that she really does feel comfortable. That's what you've got to achieve. Now, it's a hard thing to do. And I'm not saying that I can do it. I'm saying that all those who are part of Oasis and engage with a school or a youth club or whatever it is that becomes part of Oasis, because lots of these things do now, it's not what you know and how smart you are. It's about how kind you are. Do you see, that saying, they say some people walk into a room and you can just tell from their body language that what they're saying is, I'm here. And other people walk into a room and say, you're here. And it's about being that kind of person.
I know from personal experience that that sense of belonging, that ethos of belonging is so central to everything that Oasis does. And I've seen firsthand how communities who are joining the Oasis story, that sort of relentless commitment to belonging does shepherd those people in over time. Even if when they join the community first of all, or join Oasis first of all, there is suspicion because people obviously bring negative experiences and challenges over from other things. But thinking about what leaders can do, where can they start with that practice around belonging? Because lots of leaders, they'll hear what we're saying and they'll think, oh, this is just kind of fluffy stuff. But where do I actually start? Like, how can we turn this into something practical that they can take away and try?
That's the hardest question you've asked me, Dan. I think it has to come from who you actually are. So, I said I'm a Christian. I know that can mean all sorts of terrible things sometimes, but for me, it means following the way of Jesus. I talk about myself as being a Christ-centered person. Love God and love your neighbor the way you love yourself. And that for me, I'm not claiming I'm any good at it, but it is my pursuit. I think that a lot of us, we work on the externals and we work on our physical appearance and we work on our physical fitness, but it's who we are on the inside, who we actually are, and how we cultivate that and think about that matters. I think that, if you take a tube of toothpaste and you squeeze it, what comes out is toothpaste. If you're hoping tomato ketchup's going to come out or mustard's going to come out or grease is come out, it's not. And you can squeeze it as hard as you like, but it will always be toothpaste. And if you take the toothpaste tube and throw it on the floor and then jump on it with all your might, toothpaste will squirt out everywhere, but nothing but toothpaste. What's inside you comes out under pressure. What's inside you leaks out, whatever words you're using or slogans you're using or terminology you come up with. Who you are leaks out. People get a completely different impression of us than the ones we're trying to give because they see us. So it's about being authentic. That's why I say leaders need to walk, live, be the walking, talking, living embodiment of the vision, but the vision needs to be in them. I would say this, that a leader needs to be irrationally committed to what the task and the mission is. Many others will come along who are rationally committed to it, who are paid, a salary and they're part of what's going on. But the leader and as many others as possible need to be irrationally committed to it. This is why I say I had this wonderful privilege of discovering what my life was about at the age of 14. This is what I would do it if I was paid for it or if I wasn't paid for it. In fact, I wasn't paid for it for a long time. I did it because it comes out of me. I'm not claiming to be anything great. I know I make endless mistakes. There's always a gap between our aspiration and our actual delivery of who we are. And that is a big, wide one in my case. But that's it. So it's about your authenticity.
Steve, it's been such an incredible conversation and so great for us to spend some time catching up. And I think if I was going to summarize, I think it's a little bit like this, that who you are is going to come out in how you lead, especially when you're under pressure. And if you're a leader who's thinking, how do I imbibe a sense of belonging and ownership and commitment from my community? The answer might not lie in tactics or another seminar or some more training. It might actually lie in the inner work. Is your vision naturally coming out of who you are and attracting the people around you? That is, I think, such a critical question for leaders to take away and think about following today's episode. So, Steve, thank you so much for making some time for the show, and let's speak again soon.
Thanks a lot, Dan. Thank you. God bless you.
And that's a wrap for today's episode of Culture Crush. If you've enjoyed your time with us, please like and subscribe wherever you're listening from. And if you're a Culture First leader, be sure to visit anthem.oo because we've got lots in common. See you next time.